right in the heart of the Depression. My mother and father brought up three boys and one girl right through the Depression. And we always had food and clothing and enough coal in the basement for winter, but very little for anything else. And I think from that time, there's always, people wrote letters to each other in those days, and there's always a writing pad in the dining room, and I'd sneak in there and fill it with drawings. And I think that's where it all started, really. That was the only thing, the only amusement, let's say, we had. And it was very, very rewarding, I think, because I think even to today, I still draw every day. And I think it has a strong part of what my paintings are about. They're really built on that.
So when did you start painting, I guess, as an artist?
Well, I quit school midway through grade 9 and got a job in a grocery store right around the corner from us. And after I had all the clothes that you were supposed to have in those days, and all the movies were seen that I was supposed to see, things got pretty dull. And I got very, very bored with things. And now I'd always drawn right the way through school and painted, but not oils painting, just what they do in public schools. And I decided that I would go back to that. So I started to take some night classes in Toronto, some at the Artist Workshop, some at the college, and gradually got into it. And then one spring I saw an ad in the paper for the Doon School of Fine Arts. And this was a school for adult amateurs, a summer school, and it was in the home of Homer Watson, the Canadian landscape painter. And they had this smart idea of taking kids up there, young people from Toronto, anywhere, and having them work around the grounds and fix up cabins and whatnot, and in order to go out with under instruction. And they also hired some very prominent at that time Canadian artists as instructors: Carl Schaefer, Yvonne Hauser, Jacques MacDonald, and a number of others who, and that's who I came under influence of. And one of those instructors, Jack Bechtel from Kitchener, he had been to the college and he was teaching at the Doon School, and he had been to Mexico, and he sort of encouraged me to go down there sometime. So one fall I went down to Mexico, to San Miguel, and stayed there for 6 months or so, and came back, and I started to work at the school, teach. And I'd teach there in the summers and go away for the winters. And I went to Mexico a couple of times.
Always to San Miguel?
Yeah.
Was there a school there then?
Yes, the Instituto. And I only went there part-time once in a while. It's that type of thing where you could drop in, because there are a lot of painters, amateur painters from the States and Canada who would go down there and spend a month or a couple of weeks or something. And so anyway, one summer I got back to teaching, and one of the other instructors had had a serious car accident, so he wasn't able to take his classes. So I got a few more classes, and that gave me a little bit of extra money, so that that fall, instead of going back down to Mexico, I went to Europe and landed in Barcelona and spent the whole 6 months or so in Ibiza. And there's where most of my education in art really has come from older people who have been good enough to take me under their wing and tell me a few things. And so that was the main thing about travels that I learned as I was going. Of course, to all the museums in Europe here. And after I'd finished with Ibiza, I went to Paris stayed there for 6 months or so, and it was very rich. You know, the galleries.
This would be
50, mid 50s. I would say about 56, 7. And because when I came back in 1958, that spring, that stopped the travels for a while. And I got married in 61, and my wife and I spent a year in Europe, in Greece. And we enjoyed it very much.
all year in Greece.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we were right under the Acropolis in an area called the Plaka, which a lot of artists and different people like that would stay. And we rented a little small, tiny apartment and cooked our meals and stayed there. And we got a lot of paintings done that time.
So did you go like to the work from old classical sculpture or?
I used to do drawing in the Acropolis because there are some gorgeous things there, but not so totally studying it, just sort of drawing and learning that way. And that was very rich. Then we came back, and I think it was 58, and that sort of did the traveling for a while. And I started to work in Toronto and get involved with the galleries, and I knew a lot of the people there, the artists, and stayed there until we moved out to the country. And then 64, 65, we moved up to Orangeville, just northwest of Toronto, and there was a schoolhouse for sale. The board were selling off old schoolhouses, and this one that sat right on the corner of the side roads, and it was in good shape, so we bought it, $2,800, and that really got me started being stable in art, you know. And after 10 years there, we had 2 children there, a boy and a girl, and they grew up there. Well, for 10 years we were there, and then I got tired of the winters, but we all got tired of the winters. And you know, you'd park your car out in front of the schoolhouse at night and be snowing a bit, and first thing in the morning you couldn't see it. So my wife had parents who had a fishing boat up in Port Alberni, and we visited them a couple of times, and that did it. We decided, I think we'll go to the West Coast. So we moved to Victoria and moved right into Fairfield in the Cook Street Village, and a very nice old home, and the kids grew up there really. And it was, well, 4 or 5 years ago that it got to be that. It was getting old, the house was old, and it needed a lot of maintenance, and I couldn't do it anymore. So we decided to pool our resources, my daughter and her husband and 2 children, and my wife and I, and pool our resources and move to a place where it's more convenient for my state of being. And we enjoyed it there and had a gorgeous time there, and we missed the village too. You know, it's really changed a lot.
It's on Chapman.
Yeah.
I think I visited you there that one time.
You did, yeah, I think you did.
That's when you were doing this stuff with the Chapman group. Was it Raymond? I can't remember.
Raymond Lorenz, yes. And that's in the catalog too. You can read about that. And yeah, we spent 30 years there, I guess. And we found this place, and it seemed to be just right. I mean, there's a huge basement, which we put racks up, and that's where all the paintings are. And as I say, I had a studio in the basement too, which worked out very well. But I can't walk, so I can't go down there. And I guess 3, 4, 5 years ago, I had this stroke, and thankfully it didn't do anything with my upper body or hands or arms. It just the lower part. And so it's just a matter of working at it and hoping that someday I'll be able to do it again. But I'm, I'm very lucky because I'm in the best rest home in Canada, I tell the people, because it's, I'm fed, good meals. My daughter loves to cook, and there's a bed to sleep on, and a studio where I can come into it every day. I can be in here shortly after 9 every day if I want, and I usually am. And I usually paint during the mornings. That's why we arrange this for the afternoon, because I have most energy, things work out best. And during the afternoon, there's lots of reading to do and getting ready for other paintings the next day. So, and then I got involved with the Winchester, 2-3 years ago, and that's been a very happy experience with Peter mainly. He's the one.
The colors that you use, the palette that you use, to me it's so bright and
Yeah. The colors I use are all out there, and or versions of them, and I just simply use them because they're out there, and I mix them on the palette. And now there's something more than that, of course, because you could use all the beautiful colors in the world, but there's got to be that unity of one color working with another color. And that's always the wrestling match, is making the colors work together. And I've just learned, and I've learned over the years too, the importance of a what's the word I'm looking for? A single. What the hell? Yeah. This is old age for you.
I get that.
Well, a simplified palette, instead of using all the colors that you could use, just using a few. Very, very simple. And that's one of the main thrusts I'm trying to do now, is not to introduce too many colors. In fact, there's more power and strength and the fewer you use sometimes, if you just use them properly. I think all of that has contributed to what I use of color now. And the colors in the art books, the Matisse and Renoir and all those people. My God, the colors, astounding. That's interesting. It's a question, it's a good question, where influences come from and what helps us along the way.
Yeah, I think sometimes too, there are artists that I'm interested in, and people say, "Oh, you were influenced by them." Maybe in some ways, but also they're doing something that you see that you're also doing, or that resonates with
Yeah.
what you're doing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole thing about influence too, whole books have been written out who influenced who and how it's been. And there's some truth in it, I'm sure. But at the same time, it's what you say too. Sometimes something clicks, yeah, indeed. And it doesn't click in the sort of way that, okay, he used that color and mixed up that. No, it's a deeper thing than that. It's your whole soul, really.
Something that's part of it's already in you, or it's already being expressed in your work, and you see the connection.
And I've always come back to oil because I don't get the same satisfaction, the same richness that I like with oil. And, it makes sense to work with acrylic, I think. But it doesn't do the same for me as the oil does.
I wish they could make it that had the same body as oil paint. That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
But then it would be oil paint. It wouldn't be acrylic.
Exactly, yeah.
So you've been painting in oil with the same painting from the same company, or you have changed
Well,
over the years?
so basically, Efren is where I can get the best deal on prices. And I've used Grumbacher right from the beginning. That's all I've ever used, really. And but there's Stevenson. I use their white, because big tubes. And or as I say, whatever's on sale, and it's good quality. I was very influenced by the Dune School because they were top rate Canadian painters in those days.
So what were they, landscape painters predominantly, or?
Landscape and barley was painted there at one time, so there were figures. But that ethic seemed to rub off on me. And when we moved here, I brought all that with me. And we moved here in '76. And I claim the 70s were my most happiest time for painting. I've got a big stock of 70s paintings which still work. But you know, you never can leave well enough alone, so I had a show at the gallery, the Circus Series, and that was when things were starting to flatten out. Now, when I got working at the Victoria College of Art, they were into one of the years, one of the last years I was there, they were working with the flat surfaces, and I never really accepted that in myself. And although there are some good things I learned about just arranging flat surfaces.
Color.
Yeah.
Color more. What I found interesting, though, even though you were supposed to do some flat color, you still managed to make it linear,
I know.
which you weren't supposed to, but you managed to make it
Yeah.
that way. Just when you put the
Well, it's interesting because I strongly believe that the drawing has been one of the strong points of my work. Whether I'm right or wrong doesn't matter. It's just that that's what I start with.
start with the drawing, because it looks like, a lot of times it looks like it's like washes of color. You see lots of color, and then you see line floating off
Well,
the top
yes,
of it.
it comes from marks. The painting I'm doing now, all the paintings I've done in the last 10 years or so, it just comes from marks I put on the canvas, which lead to other marks. And first of all, and then suddenly you see something emerging from it. And I still feel myself about something, you know, maybe not just flat color. And although I enjoy a lot of paintings that way, not for myself. And so after that year at the college where we're doing flat color, I was getting somewhat restless and disgruntled with the situation there. And about that time, Raymond Lorenz, who was Mexican, philosopher, theologian, and whatnot, he and his wife brought up children from youngsters or teenagers from Mexico and placed them in schools and mentored them. And one of the girls that they had brought up, Lucia San Roman, was they just couldn't fit her in anywhere, so he brought her to the college because she had drawn and painted a bit. And that was very important for me because she ended up writing her master's thesis at ExhibitVic on my work. And now she went to San Diego. She was a curator at the San Diego Art Museum. And she and her husband are living in Boston now because he's doing studies in architecture. And she is doing freelance curatorial work. And
So that transition was, you went from the stuff you were doing at the school, very flat, to that?
almost. I had that. The only period where I felt I was getting something that I liked out of the flatness was the Circus Series, and I had a show at the art gallery of that. Yeah, do you?
First saw your work.
Really? And But then I carried on, and then I met Raymond, and the circus series was on when he came, and he came down to the studio one Sunday, and we sat and talked. He came about noon, and we didn't finish talking till about midnight, and he finally left. But I was really, really won over by his knowledge and his thoughts and ideas. And it was through him, and through him, we started to believe that abstraction wasn't enough. There had to be something more, and something more than just flat color. And the experimenting we did was involved with that kind of experimentation into the types of work that you remember, the curved spaces, and rather than a flattened space, curved space, and that was the beginning of it. And we worked for 10 years with him. Then he died in '99, and everyone in the group has gone over different parts of Canada now. My son's in Montreal, and another good member was John Clymonegg, who's in Peterborough, and Lucia's down in Boston, and Mark Labor's still here in town. And so this summer, a few of us are going to get together. We're hoping that, well, it's not that many. If they all know about it, we're going to try and have sort of a mini reunion of the whole thing, because we don't want that to die, what we had learned and what happened during those Raymond years.
So a lot of your work after that seemed like almost, it wasn't a rejection, it almost seemed like you kind of rebelled against that as well.
Yeah. Well, we all have done, but to a man we just agreed that that was the most important part of our lives, is that what happened when he was around.
You talk about when you were in Ontario, it was the I can't remember the group now, sorry, the artist, but what about what was happening in New York? Because, you know, it seems like you were over in Europe when everything was supposedly happening in New York.
Yeah, well, that's interesting too, because when I was over in the Bees, I was out sketching one day, and a chap walked by and he said, "Oh, you're that other Canadian." I said, "Yeah," and it was Ross Coates, who's from Hamilton, Ontario, and he had been to the Chicago Art Institute, and he got his doctorate there, and he filled me in on this whole business of what was really happening with the abstract expressionists in New York, and I became very in love with that, and that was a big deal. And when I came back that spring, there just happened to be a show of the abstract expressionists in Buffalo, and a friend of mine went over to see that, and it was just a whole period of art that was brand new for me.
What did it seem like in Europe, though, when you were over in Paris? Did it seem like...
Well, there was so many museums there, and the historical thing is so
Other
important.
than historical, I mean, what the artists themselves, I mean, by then they were supposedly supposed to be irrelevant, but how did it feel to you when you were over there? Like, what was the art scene like?
I think the art scene as such, now that's another thing. I never really enjoyed any sort of art scene over there. But what I could see in the commercial galleries around, they were just barely catching on to the abstract expressionists. They were, I think they understood that that was something, but it wasn't a very strong influence at that time.
And on your work, how much of an influence would you say it was? Because
Vast.
a lot of your work seems to be like sitting between a dialogue between abstraction and figurative.
Yeah, it is. It's always has been, it seems.
So it's like something like de Kooning, that makes me think of de Kooning's work.
Or Herschel Gorky,
Gorky, for sure.
and certainly Guston.
Guston, I see that stuff he was doing in his late Guston, that when he was doing the cartoon.
Well, the late ones are the ones that I am very much a nerd of.
Oh, I
like,
love that.
yeah,
That to me is
yeah. I mean, it's he changed. You know, not too many people supported him.
No, none of the critics actually. I read a book about that, about his late period. All the critics, almost 99% of them, they just panned him. Even his friends, like Morton Feldman, the composer, was a dear friend. They broke up. Their friendship ended as a result of that.
Well, that's unfortunate because de Kooning was one of the only painters that stood up. Right? He said Philip's painting freedom, and that's the pure sense of it. You know, he had had enough of everything that was happening. He's well and there. He did it very well. He's very popular, and he was very successful. But it wasn't enough.
But he also, he did those women and stuff, which must have been quite shocking because it was certainly not abstract.
No, well, that's the thing, and this is what I admire about him, and you know, it might be hard for some people to see, but they're beautifully painted. You know, they're gorgeous paintings. Period. No matter how cartoony they got to be, or even hideous that way. They're beautiful paintings. I have a great respect and admiration for him. The trouble is, I have several books on him, and I have to be careful how much I look at them, because they're not easy to copy, but it would be very easy to become influenced by his calligraphy, really.
Find yourself suddenly it's your painting. Oh, that's an Augustin. Or
Yeah, and
that bothers you? Like, would that really bother you?
well, I have to do the same about Bacon too, because he's one of my very, very all-time great favorites, and seemingly on the surface it would be easy to paint something like that, and I guess I have, but that isn't where it is at, you know.
But you would never mistake your work for a Bacon, but you can see the influence of Bacon.
Yeah, well, that's it. And some times of my work is more of an influence than others. But it'd be easy to do it with Augustine as well, you know, because he could slip in. I just admire him so much.
Looking at see that green stuff poking out, it kind of makes me think of Augustine. Very
Oh, yeah.
cartoony.
Well, sure. I mean, it's there.
But do you try to, like, if you find yourself doing that, you try to pull back from that, or?
I'm aware of it happening, and I feel everything that we see or listen to or whatever goes into us, and somewhere along the line it comes out. And I feel that there will come a time when I've rid myself of it. I shouldn't say rid, that's too strong, but have freed myself from that.
Are there any artists now working, younger artists that you're aware of, that you would be tempted by?
Well, offhand I can't really mention any, but I get art magazines, and I have a lot of art books, and I think it's a matter in a lot of cases of admiring some of these people and taking in what they have and using it in your own way, but just being aware of them, as you say. And there's lots of things happening. There's lots of things happening too that are, for me, very useless too.
What about this whole idea about paintings being dead, or it's been dead for so often?
You know, I just can't go along with that, of course, because as long as someone can touch something with a pigment and a brush, it's not dead.
Well, there's so many artists painting still. It's rather strange to be saying it's dead.
Yeah, if it's dead, well, a lot of people